kind of.
I think we're all more sensitive as to how we're feeling when we wake up every morning, just to think about what we're going to do that day, and maybe ultimately it is a positive thing that we can take from this. Ian Lesfader, always good to catch up with you.
He is our myth buster.
Always enjoy it. Our myth buster.
Totally.
I really enjoyed catching up with him.
Me too.
All right, he is associate clinical professor at NYU's Langone Medical Center. Thank you so much. Let's get down to Nancy Lyons in Washington now with World National Headlines. Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Jason. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is the first woman to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman says members of Congress and their staff are paying their respects today.
Opera star Denise Graves sang in honor of the opera-loving justice. Speaker Nancy Pelosi spoke briefly.
It is with profound sorrow and deep sympathy to the Ginsburg family that I have the high honor to welcome Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg to lie in state in the Capitol of the United States.
Former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Kamala Harris were among those present. Justice Ginsburg will be buried next week in Arlington National Cemetery. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Two former leaders of a Massachusetts veterans home are facing charges of criminal neglect after 76 residents at the Holyoke Soldiers Home died of the virus. Attorney General Maura Healey says the leaders consolidated 2 dementia units into one, causing the outbreak to spread.
To know that they died under the most horrific circumstances is truly shocking.
Each man has been charged with 5 counts of criminal neglect, 5 counts of serious bodily injury. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam is being added to the list of officials who have coronavirus. Northam's office says he and his wife both contracted COVID-19, likely from a member of his residential staff. His administration says Northam is not experiencing any symptoms. His wife is. Earlier this week, Missouri's governor announced he was also diagnosed with coronavirus. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, I feel like, Carol, on this show, we could have the, back to office corner. We talk about it all the time, in part because everybody's talking about it all the time.
Well, of course
it's not just a corner. It's like it's everything.
And I really do feel it's like, what is your company doing? What is your company doing? So as for the hedge fund world, great story by our Hema Parmar. And it depends on what hedge fund you work at. Bridgewater, D.E. Shaw, Two Sigma, they are unlikely to be back until next year, according to people familiar with the matter and some company officials. Two Sigma, they've got about 1,500. They told workers they won't be required to return before July 4th.
That's 2021.
They did say those who miss being at their desk can go in from January. About 40% of Capstone Investment Advisors' New York staff is in the office. To give employees time for creative thinking, the firm has created meeting-less Wednesdays. So it just kind of depends. There are some, though, that are back. Citadel said in June that staff could come back, and they have seen their office population grow, workers wanting to go back to work. So it just kind of depends.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before, and I feel like if I had to distill it down, we're going to live in a hybrid world, and whether that means that some people are going in all the time and other people are going in none of the time, that's one thing. I think the other thing is people saying, I keep coming back to this idea that people going in, like getting up on Monday, going in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then coming home at the end of the week, I just don't see that happening for some amount of time.
And especially when I know we've heard from folks like Ruth Porat and Jamie Dimon that, people aren't as productive. I've heard from a lot others. We talked to the president of Siemens USA today, this week, and she's like, we're going to be at home, a lot of their workers who can be at home.
We've learned a lot. Yeah, exactly. And, some
working.
Geographic dispersion and, do you figure out a way to get people together on a regular basis to maintain culture and all of those things? So we'll see. It's a work in progress at all big companies. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We begin with a developing story. Boeing shares surging 6% right now. The top American aviation regulator plans to test fly Boeing's grounded 737 MAX next Wednesday in an attempt to show an antsy public the proposed fix will be safe. This according to a source. FAA Chief Steve Dixon, who is licensed to fly the 737, along with several other jetliners from his time as a pilot at Delta, will be at the controls of the MAX. Again, we've got shares of Boeing up now by 5.9%. Stocks are climbing. Best level of the day again as dip buyers appeared after the market slide, tempering concern over a cloudy outlook for a U.S. stimulus package. S&P now up 41, up 1.3%. The Dow is up 1%, higher by 2.7%, on track for a losing week for the U.S. stock market, fourth in a row. NASDAQ up 203 points, up 1.9%. 10 years up 132nd with a yield of 0.66%. Gold down 0.2%, 1864 the ounce. Sam West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3%, 40.19 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly and Carol Massar here with you on a Friday afternoon, a busy Friday. We're taking a look at the markets, but it's also the equality issue of Bloomberg Business Week magazine, pairing with the Bloomberg Equality Summit. So we've been talking about a lot of things that have really come to the fore, Carol, in these past few months, these dueling pandemics we've often called them, we and others have called them. So let's talk about what's happening in one specific city. Susan Burfield is here with us, projects and investigations reporter for Bloomberg Business Week. She's on the phone. Also joining us, Joel Weber, the editor of Bloomberg Business Week. He joins us from Massachusetts. Joel, tee this up for us. This is a fascinating story.
Yeah, and one that Susan flagged to us a few months ago now and just said, hey, this is one that we've got to find a way to do, and it makes so much sense in the quality issue. And this is a story about the city of Stockton, which America has not been known for basic income. That is an idea that has been used a lot and it continues to be used in other international countries. In particular, Finland had a huge experiment with universal basic income. Stockton has emerged as the first place in decades that is flirting with this in America, and it couldn't have come at a more relevant time because basically as the program started, COVID hit. Susan, pick it up from there. What has the city of Stockton learned about free money experiments?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on. The experiment in Stockton is unusual and a little bit different than, say, the experiment in Finland, and it's what made it kind of particularly interesting to me and relevant to the issue. And that is, the design of the experiment and the attempt is not to focus on just the unemployed, as the experiment in Finland did, as Andrew Yang during the presidential campaign did, assuming people might lose their jobs from automation and are going to need a little extra help. This program is looking very specifically at people who live in low-income neighborhoods, who need, what they called essentially a financial vaccine. They need something that makes them a little more resistant, a little less vulnerable to all of the kinds of shocks that existed before the pandemic, and then especially those that came because of the pandemic.
I love this story. I know the magazine has talked about this before. Susan, we're not talking about welfare, though, right? It's different.
Yeah, so this is the notion that, people know what they need, and, when they don't have a lot of money, what do they need? They need money, and that they know how to spend it. So it's a cash dividend. In this case, it's given out every month. It was $500. The program was meant to end in July, and because of the pandemic, the mayor and others found additional funding to continue it through January. So it'll be for almost 2 years. About 125 people have received an extra $500 every month. And that's in addition to whatever other benefits they may be receiving. And it's not meant to replace those, but to give people flexibility.
And Susan, why Stockton? Why was that the place that became sort of the petri dish for this particular experiment?
Stockton's interesting for a lot of reasons. It is in some ways a typical American city, in that it was falling behind in some ways. It is atypical in that it's very diverse, among the most diverse cities in America. But with that has come, inequality. There's a pretty high poverty rate. Stockton was known as being one of the early epicenters of the housing crisis in 2008. It was the first major city to declare bankruptcy before Detroit. And so, it had kind of come in and out of the national attention. More recently, in 2016, it elected a very young Black mayor who is a very effective advocate for the city and brought this program to Stockton and is its biggest champion.
Yeah, and we should point out that Mayor Michael Stubbs, has been supported by Michael Bloomberg. He graduated from a Harvard mayoral training program back in 2018. Mayor Stubbs did, and also Bloomberg Philanthropies has donated to a Stockton education reform group. Just want to put that out there. So, Susan, as other cities have seen what's been going on, is this something, especially, you mentioned this earlier, that Andrew Yang, the presidential candidate, had sort of put out this idea. Does this have the potential to catch on?
Yeah, so just this summer, Mayor Tubbs announced a coalition of other mayors, there's 25 now, who are willing and interested in advocating for some kind of policy like this at the state and federal level, and maybe even more important, are committed to raising the money to put in place experiments in their own cities. And what we could say about that is that I think in part, Stockton's experiment has shown so far, it's still underway obviously, that people are happier, that they're less stressed, and that they feel like they can make better decisions for themselves and their families with this money. So I think during a pandemic, alongside civil unrest and, protests against racism, that this is a policy that more mayors, at least, are considering and thinking are worthwhile to try to fund. And then, we'll see what happens beyond that.
Right. Well, and what's interesting is it kind of gets, these are people who are working, they have jobs. It's just they can barely make things, meet and provide for their families. And so that's what's interesting. And the virus has reminded us, and you write this in your story, about how vulnerable many, many Americans are to a sudden shock and need some kind of assistance like this. All right, Susan, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Susan Burfield. She's projects and investigations reporter at Bloomberg Business Week, on the phone from New York. Our thanks to Joel as well. Check out that equality issue.
Yeah, it's a great story. Definitely worth a read, and part of, as you say, a big issue dedicated to equality, pairing nicely with our Equality Summit, which you've been hearing a lot about this week. Well, for those of you listening in New York, D.C., San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week continues right here. If you're listening on Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, Bay State Business, that is coming up next. And Susan was too nice to point it out, but I mispronounced his. I said Stubbs. It's Tubbs, Mayor Tubbs there in Stockton.
All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. It's Friday. Just cut us some slack. This is Bloomberg.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading, and we are looking at an update here again. Best level of the day with the Dow up 303 points, up 1.1%. Got to keep it locked into Bloomberg Radio for the very latest as we head toward the closing bell. S&P up 45. That is a gain of 1.4%. NASDAQ up 217, higher by 2%. Just getting word that an Ukrainian military plane has crashed. There are fatalities. Again, that is a developing story. Stocks climbing as dip buyers appeared after the market slide, tempering concern over a cloudy outlook for a U.S. stimulus package. S&P hitting session highs. NASDAQ 100 index higher by roughly 2%, led by tech names Apple and Tesla. Right now we've got Apple shares. They're up by 3.3%. Tesla rallying now by 4%. The top American aviation regulator plans to test fly Boeing's grounded 737 MAX Wednesday in an attempt to show an antsy public the proposed fixes will be safe. This according to a person familiar with the plans. So we are looking at an update here. The 10-year yield 0.65%, gold down 0.2%, 18.65 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 0.2%, 40.25 a barrel. Well, as for the overall market backdrop, Jim Paulson is chief investment strategist at the Luthold Group.
It wouldn't surprise me if we do fall 15% from the highs at some point. It doesn't have to, but it certainly could. But I guess for me, I think there's quite a bit of fundamental economic momentum here coming into this, and I think it's likely to continue to carry into the fourth quarter and beyond.
Indeed, signs of life in the oil patch. According to the latest weekly rig count numbers from Baker Hughes, oil and gas rigs up by 6. Among some of the oil names today, ExxonMobil up 1.1%, BP down 0.5%, EOG Resources up 1.9%, and Pioneer Natural pushing lower now by 0.8%. Again, recapping, S&P up 47, up 1.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
In today's Business Week Economics, excited to have back with us, and really it's a double dose for me because Danny Blanchflower was so gracious to join me and a few of our Bloomberg colleagues earlier today for a chat with breakaway CEOs. He is professor of economics at Dartmouth College, former Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee member, on the phone from Florida. Danny, first of all, I know I've messaged you, but thank you, because you really were a great force this morning. We talked with a bunch of CEOs. You talked about unemployment, the outlook for the economy. It's pretty grim in terms of how you see it. I'm just curious if you had some takeaways, from our discussion.
Well, I think the big takeaway was that some people are doing pretty well, and obviously particular businesses have managed to see their way through this, and obviously actions by the Fed have boosted asset prices. Obviously, we've had some sort of fallback over the last week or so, but that's one thing. The other worry is that, the tail end of the labor market is in big trouble. I mean, one of the big things is if you look at the wage growth series, you see that it's growing at about 6% per annum. Makes no sense. Well, what it means is that the lower part of the wage distribution has dropped out. And the concern is, well, what happens going forward? Are they going to come back? Are the temporary furloughed firms going to survive? And are people going to change their long-run behavior? And I think the answer is that none of these things look especially good. And the predictions by the Fed that the unemployment rate next year is going to go to 5.5%, and the year after that is likely to go to 4.6%, is in, cloud cuckoo land. And I think the prospects of weakening labor markets are there, and the fact that the stimulus has been dragging on suggests that we're going to see something worse before we see something better.
And so are they just being too optimistic, or are they reading the data wrong? What's the sort of missing link here?
Well, they've traditionally read the data wrong. They read it completely. In my book, Networking, I argued precisely about this. I said from 2015, they don't seem to have a clue about the labor market. They said in 2015 through 18 that the labor market was at full employment. I argued frequently that it clearly wasn't. Raised rates in error, and then we get eventually to Powell backtracking then and saying, yeah, we got that wrong. We need to sort of adapt and worry about maximum employment. I mean, in a sense, the thing they're having to do is to try and forecast forward, but it's really hard with these present data to work out exactly what's going on. And I think every time you look at it, you realize that the data are actually much worse and likely to get worse again. How can you suddenly say they know that everything's going to be great in 2021? That assumes probably a $5 trillion fiscal stimulus and probably finding an effective vaccine that everybody takes, and the furloughed firms all come back and no firms die. Well, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Right. It's like everything goes as we would hope it would go, and that's not likely. I do wonder, what are some of the discussions you're having with students at Dartmouth? I mean, you're not back on campus, and I know we talked about it earlier. Just remind us kind of how that's all going right now.
Well, it's gone pretty well. I mean, I taught it remotely in the spring. I'm teaching remotely again. It seems to be going pretty well. Dartmouth is very well resourced. I think I said to you, one thing I noticed is that there's not much interaction between student and student, although maybe they're just texting each other saying, what did I just say? I mean, I think that's obviously what's happening. One of the benefits of what I teach is what I'm talking to you about. I get them to think about how the world is. I actually start most classes and I say, this class is about what the heck is going on, which is what Carol is. You guys come on here and that's what you do too. I think that, I mean, in a sense, they're in economics and in the classes that I teach, they're incredibly interested, obviously, in what's going on and trying to see your way through this complex situation we've never seen before. I mean, we've never seen anything like this. Don't kid ourselves. The UK saw a 20% drop in output in one quarter. We've never seen anything like that. I mean, in 2008, you saw output drop by about 5 percentage points in 5 quarters. So to think that we understand what's happening, we've not seen things at this depth of drop, but I think we haven't any precedent for the speed that this has happened. So to say that these kids aren't interested, well, they're incredibly interested, and they're trying to understand what goes on because they all are worried about getting jobs and are they going to be able to come back to Dartmouth for the spring and so on. So these are exciting and interesting and scary times.
Well, and speaking of jobs, and especially for the college educated, which is, you know, candidly, the vast majority of our listeners, I mean, what does the job market look like for the next couple of years for people who, you know, do pursue an undergraduate, just sticking with undergraduate education? Is it okay for them?
Well, the answer is we know a few fundamental factors. We've worked a lot over the years about unemployment amongst the young. The one thing we know, probably of all things that you ask about college graduates, is it's worse to graduate when the unemployment rate is high. And so that means two things. It means that you basically enter lower down the job pyramid than you normally would. So imagine there's a pyramid of jobs, and you'd normally enter a place where college graduates enter, where college graduates enter. Well, they actually end up entering lower, and it takes a really, really long time, if ever, to catch up that earning power. So it's a really, it certainly is harmful to graduate in the depths of a recession, and well, we've never seen anything quite like this. So obviously that's a big concern, and I think the bigger concern even than that are people who are graduating or even dropping out of high school. Yeah. What's going to happen to those kids? Where are they going to go? And I think at least, you know, the college graduates mostly will be okay, but it's the 17-year-old who dropped out of a high school in Queens or in Alabama or in San Francisco, which we're really going to have to worry about. And in the 30s, they had to set up schemes to deal with them. The Civilian Conservation Corps was set up to deal with millions of people. And we're slow to the act.
Well, and you know what?
We're going to have to.
Danny, we're going to do a little bit of news, and then we'll come back, because we also want to talk about a story we just talked about with one of our reporters about a guaranteed basic income, and I wonder if you have some thoughts about that. So we'll get into that in just a moment. We'll continue.
We're also going to talk about sleep.
Oh, yes, because I shared that research with you. It's really cool.
You did. I'm glad you did.
Danny Blanchflower over at Dartmouth, professor of economics. We'll get back to him in just a moment. In the meanwhile, let's get another check on world and national news headlines. Let's check in with Nancy Lyons. She is in her 991 DC studio. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. There is renewed hope another stimulus package could be coming. President Trump's top economic aide, Larry Kudlow, spoke with reporters outside the White House today.
The conversations are going on. The Democrats come back with a plan that's more palatable to our thinking, that would be fine. We'll let the president decide on that.
He says the president wants to see direct checks, some unemployment assistance, and an extension of the Paycheck Protection Program. The late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is lying in state at the U.S. Capitol, the first woman to receive that honor. During a ceremony earlier today, Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt called Ginsburg a prophet who must now be permitted to rest.
She fought 5 bouts with cancer, and she supported her beloved Marty through his battle with cancer as well. Each time, she pressed forward. She returned to work, to the bench, to the court, with focus, each and every time.
One moving tribute today came from Ginsburg's trainer of 20 years who did 3 push-ups beside her casket. President Trump plans to name his Supreme Court nominee tomorrow. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam and his wife, Pamela Northam, have tested positive for COVID-19 and will isolate themselves for 10 days. In a statement from his office, Northam says he is asymptomatic. His wife does have mild symptoms. Both tested positive yesterday after being notified a member of the governor's residential staff who works closely in their living quarters had developed symptoms. Earlier in the week, Missouri's governor also tested positive. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. I'm going to quote a very wise man who happens to be my brother, Win, who lived in Florida for a few years in Miami and often says when stories like the one that we're about to talk about come through, Florida gonna Florida.
Florida gonna Florida.
So the most read story in the last hour on the Bloomberg is about the state of Florida.
Yep.
The governor, Ron DeSantis, completely reopening the economy. Basically, no restrictions, fully open, conscious of the fact that people are still dying of COVID-19 and complications thereof in his state, but pressing forward.
Hundreds of COVID-19 deaths a week still. And you're right. They're lifting all restrictions on restaurants and other businesses. He made some comments today, also said he would make it harder for local governments to institute their own restrictions, which have gone above and beyond the state's rules. We've seen that, right? Separation, especially when there are cities that don't agree with what their governors are doing. And so, yeah, this is their 3rd phase of reopening, and they're moving ahead.
It'll be interesting to see, whether neighboring states follow. Georgia, of course, the governor there, Governor Brian Kemp, also a Republican. Ron DeSantis, a Republican. They were sort of in lockstep early on in the pandemic, both hit by pretty big waves. I mean, I'm looking at the data right now for Florida. The most recent data as of yesterday, 2,541 new cases in Florida. Now, that is down from, the peak was back in July, and it was, I'm just trying to get it here, 15,300.
So it's come down.
Substantially down,
dramatically.
but much higher even than it was in late May. So we got to watch this.
Still have about 700 COVID-19 deaths a week. There's still a lot of uncertainty about, listen, we see it as things start to reopen schools and we start to see relaxed measures. He says, that they're ready to move if they start to see an increase. But we have to hope that that's the case, because this is how things start to get out of control, and this is how it starts to spread again, and this is how we get to a second wave.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got 43 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ pushing higher. Best level of the day, still on track for a losing week, though. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. And here he is, Bailey Lipschultz.
Good afternoon, Charlie. As you said, stocks have climbed in our near-session highs as investors took advantage of the market's recent decline despite an uncertain outlook for a U.S. stimulus package. The Dow is up 380 points, S&P is higher by 55, while the NASDAQ rose 250 points. U.S. 10-year yield is at 0.66%, and small caps are up 10. All 11 main S&P sectors are trading higher, led by gains in tech, industrials, and healthcare. NASDAQ Biotechs gained 2.2%, transports rose 200 points, semis added 33, while the VIX is lower by 6.8%. Leaders in the Dow, Boeing, Apple, and United, while Nike, Dow, and Merck are the worst performers. In deal news, Apollo and Caesars have approached UK gambling firm William Hill about a takeover, and Boeing gained on the FAA's plans to test fly its 737 MAX jet next week. Cruise liners outperformed after Barclays said the worst is in the past for the industry, and Novavax jumped after starting a late-stage study of its COVID-19 vaccine. Live from the First Word Breaking News Desk, I'm Bailey Lipschultz. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bailey. Again, Boeing shares surging now by 6.1%, certainly leading the Dow higher. Best level of the day right now, and again, recapping S&P up by 1.8%. To hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get back to our conversation with Danny Blanchflower, professor of economics at Dartmouth, joining us on the phone from Florida. So, Danny, got to ask you about some research that you shared with Carol. She was nice enough to share with me, which is very close to hers and my heart. We talk about sleep all the time, and what's interesting is you have given statistical and very well done academic evidence to what I have seen in my co-host, which is too little or too much is not what we need. We need just the right amount of sleep. Tell me what you found.
Well, we have lots of evidence. I'm a person as a labor economist, so I'm interested in unemployment, and I'm interested in the consequences of unemployment. Well, it turns out one of the big things that you find is that the unemployed have really bad sleep. And what I hadn't really understood is not only, well, they have disrupted sleep. Right. And that's the other thing. Even if you get enough hours, what we've seen in this great pandemic is people's disruption of sleep is a big deal. But what I found is that short sleep's really bad, and the unemployed disproportionately have short sleep, and that's one of the big things that's going on now. But one of the serious consequences, in a way it looks, of not having a job is that actually people sleep a really long time. They sleep too long, and that has bad consequences as well. But I think the evidence right now, and Carol's point worried about, during this pandemic, the evidence of all these academic papers being written is that people especially wake up in the night and they wake up and they worry. They worry about their family and their friends and the pandemic and how they're going to pay the bills and how they're going to eat. So I think one of the things we're going to see is really more and more documented evidence of the importance of sleep, and there's lots of medical journals all about it. But I don't think people really have connected together that an unemployment shock comes. We're talking about now this pandemic shock, the economy shuts down, unemployment comes, and the mechanism, if you like, to get to a bad outcome, a bad health outcome, mental or physical, is through sleep. And I think what it says is, and Carol's the expert too on this, which is that having decent sleep really matters. And I think that's one of the things it appears that's really taken a hit in the last 6 months. And unlikely to suddenly get better.
Say again?
And unlikely to suddenly get better. Which is if you think there's a V-shaped recovery, one of the things I always say to people is, does that make sense? Do you think that in the next 6 months suddenly all those issues are over? Carol's not going to worry about her kids and her kids being in school and all of that stuff. It's all suddenly going to go away. You must assume, I guess, that your sleep is going to be, even if the economy does recover strongly, your sleep's not going to recover as quickly because we're all anxious and depressed and lonely and all of that. And
Right.
that's not going away.
Well-
So the idea that you're going to get a V shape, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, and there's costs. I know you talk about healthcare costs, but you also talk about, when people are in that position, they're less likely to get out there and look for a job. It just puts them in a bad way.
Well, think of the part of it, which particularly is if unemployed people sleep too long. What it means is they sleep too long, they miss the appointment. I mean, we've seen that a lot in the UK. They've introduced all these sorts of measures about if you're unemployed, these are the benefits that you get, and you have to show up for a meeting. And one of the big things that happens is people don't show up to their meetings. Now, why? They lose their benefits. Some of it, I assume, is that they can't get up. I mean, there's a good reason for it. I mean, you might say it's because they're lazy, whatever, but if the evidence is people are sleeping too long, it means then they can't get to their appointments, they probably can't show up for an interview, and even if they do get a job, they're not reliable because they don't come into work. Well, that's bad.
It is interesting, too, to think about, this ultimately being a health crisis of multifaceted proportion, Carol.
Yeah, I mean, I do think we're all looking at things differently in terms of the costs and the impact. And luckily, some people, have the means or the health care that can take care of all of this stuff, or a lot of it. Not everybody's that way. So, Danny, I don't know, leave us with some thoughts. Any optimism out there ahead of the weekend?
Well, the thing I know in my happiness research is that there is a U shape in happiness, which means that the low is in the mid-40s, but eventually it gets better. I mean, in general, economies do eventually bounce back. And if you're at the low point of the happiness function, what I can tell you is that you can be like me, a little older and on the rising part of the happiness function, and you get grandkids. And the great thing is when they have a dirty diaper, you can hand it to mom. Hi, sweetheart, it's great. Would you kind of manage this, please? I'm going fishing.
There you go.
That's the positive to think.
All right. Well, we hope that we're on the upside of the U before too long. And we as always, thank you for your time, and especially generous to Bloomberg today, given the great conversation I know you had already earlier with Carol Masser. Danny Blanchflower is professor of economics at Dartmouth College. We love catching up with him. His insights.
You better watch, Jason. I might just make Danny my co-host.
Listen, I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised. You guys have great chemistry.
Good stuff, though. And, he's really looking at the labor market and really worried about that younger generation. And I think we saw it with the financial crisis, right? They missed out, graduated and came out into a labor market that if they were lucky enough to get a job, it maybe wasn't a great one. And they were set back. I mean, how you start,
off setback.
right?
Yep.
It's a big deal.
It compounds.
All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser, there is no other co-host, Jason Kelly, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Ready for
Friday
some
chart and song.
I'm ready for a chart. I'm ready for a song.
Yeah,
I'm ready for my Friday glass of wine.
Yeah, and pizza.
Yeah, I can't do that
Pizza
quite
night.
yet, but I can do the chart and the music.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, if you're just like stuffing your face and drinking, I'm going to let people know.
I know you will. Full disclosure, Carol is stuffing her face and drinking wine. Okay, not yet, not yet. Let's get back to your top business stories to check on that trading day. We've got 29 minutes to go to wrap up that trading week, Charlie Pellet.
Indeed, and just checking the calendar, we've only got a couple more days left in the whole quarter. But right now, let's focus on what's going on in the next 28 minutes. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing, looking like we are on track for a losing week. However, it is an up Friday here. Stocks are advancing as dip buyers appeared after the market slide, tempering concern over a cloudy outlook for a stimulus package. S&P 500 index is pushing higher now by 54 points, up 1.7%. The Dow's up 382 points, up 1.4%. NASDAQ up 246 points, up 2.3%. Bottom line, U.S. stocks very close to session highs. Transports up 1.6%. NASDAQ 100 index up by 2.4%. 10-year yield 0.65%. Gold is down 0.2% this Friday at $18.63. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.2%, 40.24 a barrel. The UK has added London to its watch list of potential pandemic hotspots as coronavirus cases surge across the United Kingdom. One area of investigation for medical researchers is so-called asymptomatic carriers of COVID. Dr. Andrew Pekosh is a professor of molecular microbiology and immunology at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
It's great that these people aren't getting ill, but we have to realize that they're still capable of transmitting the virus to others. And if you're not showing symptoms, you may not be as vigilant in terms of your social distancing and wearing your masks and other things. So it represents an important population that we need to target for the greater good, for the public health community in general, to make sure that we reduce the number of COVID-19 cases.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. The U.S. housing market, which has been a bright spot in the pandemic-battered economy, is running out of fuel, with buyers eager to take advantage of low mortgage rates. Inventory of homes to buy is scarce. Home builders, though, they are pushing, for the most part, higher today. Toll is up by 0.9%. Lennar down 0.7%. KB Home lower now by 1.5%. Recapping, stocks higher. S&P up 52, up 1.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio. Talking Heads.
Totally.
I believe. I don't know the name of the song, though.
Hear my voice?
Are you Googling?
First two words you heard, Jason. Warning sign.
Oh,
Warning
nice.
sign. Interesting. Oh, I like it. I like it. I
Apply
like it.
to a lot this year, man.
Well, and you
Absolutely.
teased this
Right?
very nicely at the top
Yeah.
of the show. So tell us what you're talking about, Dave.
Thank you. It's all about, looking back and seeing what was going on in the stock market before we saw the highs in early September. It's something that Tony Dwyer did. He's the chief market strategist over at Canaccord Genuity. And usually when we try and pick apart the market, we look at equal weight indexes, to try and get an idea of what's going on with smaller companies, getting beyond, let's say, the S&P 500 that's dominated by the biggest stocks. Well, sort of an alternative to that is just looking at day to day, how many stocks go up, how many stocks go down, comparing the two, and then tracking them over time. What I just described is what's called a cumulative advanced decline line. And Dwyer looked at one that tracks all the securities that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So you've got bonds in the mix, you've got preferred shares in the mix, other investments. and you saw it peak 3 weeks before the highs we saw on the S&P 500 and the Dow Industrials and the NASDAQ. And what I did to kind of add a layer to the analysis is look at a stock-specific version of a cumulative advanced decline line. So all the NYSE listed shares, and you saw the same pattern. 3 weeks before, you saw the indicator peak and then turn lower. So at least in Dwyer's view, this was a warning sign of what was coming for the indexes as well. And it certainly played out like that. So, it's an interesting kind of look into, a technical indicator that doesn't get a lot of attention, but in its own way can be just as telling perhaps as looking at something like an equal weight index.
Dave, remember when we used to talk about the advanced decline line, though, all the time? I'd remember doing hits from, the stock exchange, and, you'd always talk about that ratio, and I feel like we don't anymore.
Yeah, because we find other ways to kind of make the same points, arguably.
Yeah.
And so this was sort of a throwback, I guess you could say, in that respect. But if you want to know more, send me an email. I'll get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
So we can do this weekend, Dave.
What am I going to do this weekend? Good question. I'm figuring it out as I go. In fact, I'm figuring out next week as I go because I'm not here.
Whoa.
You don't know yet? You mean you're just going to wing it, jump in a van and, hit the trails?
Well, I don't know about jumping in a van, maybe my SUV, but that's a whole nother story. But you know what that means?
What?
It means that the Song of the Day playlist for September is ready to go and will be posted online in a few short moments.
That's very cool. I'm going to put it next to my yoga.
Carol's going to RT that like crazy.
Autumnal equinox playlist.
Autumnal equinox playlist?
Yes, I have a good one.
For what is it?
For yoga.
For yoga?
Yeah,
Okay.
we brought in the equinox, right?
Yeah, coming up.
No, it just happened.
Oh, it happened.
First day of fall.
First day of fall. Who knew? All right, Dave Wilson. Well, we'll talk to you before you go. We'll talk to you right after the close of trading for your stock of the day. But very much looking forward to that playlist, and we will spread it far and wide socially, which is really Carol. I'm a peasant compared to her when it comes to other people. Like, hey, that's great that you retweeted it. Could you get Carol to retweet it? I told you that.
Well, even you were like, could you retweet my?
Yeah, of course. But listen, I'm not an idiot.
That's because you don't work at it. Did I say that low? Listen, you got a lot on your plate. I don't know.
We got 2 hours and roughly 22 minutes left in this show. So I would suggest you tune in because we don't know where it's going from here. It's Friday afternoon. Carol is unbound. I think it's fair to say.
I don't know that I'm unbound. I'm just, it's been a long week. I was in the office on Monday. It feels like it was a month ago.
Yeah,
Isn't that crazy?
Exactly. Well, and I'll try and work at it a little bit more. Work harder. I think
Just
is
on
what you said.
Twitter. Just on
Twitter.
Twitter. That wasn't everything.
All right. I'll do better. I'll do better, Carol. All right, let's get to Nancy Lyons for World National Headlines. Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Jason. President Trump has been courting Hispanics in Florida, telling them his Democratic rival Joe Biden has not been their friend.
He sold out the Hispanic American community, sending your jobs to China, making your communities less safe, attacking your religious values and trapping countless children in failing government schools. He doesn't like charter schools. He doesn't like choice.
He called Democrats stone cold crazy and condemned violence in Democratic-led cities. He's now in Atlanta this afternoon and is slated to attend a rally in Virginia tonight, although state officials there are concerned about the anticipated crowd of 4,000 that would violate the state's limit on gatherings of 250. Russian President Vladimir Putin is offering a mutual non-aggression pact with the U.S. in cyberspace. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager reports.
In an online statement, Putin proposes that both the U.S. and Russia agree not to interfere in each other's elections and to work toward a global agreement against conducting the first cyber strike. Sources within the Kremlin tell Bloomberg officials in Russia are working overtime to wargame scenarios for a Joe Biden presidency last year. One source says a Biden win could move up parliamentary elections to get them out of the way in case a new president imposes additional sanctions on Russia. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
NASA is struggling to find a persistent air leak on the space shuttle and as a precaution will restrict the 3-member crew to the Russian segment of the station for another weekend. NASA says the leak presents no immediate danger. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
Yes.
All right. So this sort of came up not really yesterday, but we were talking about one of our favorite podcasts with one of our favorite people, the person, Joe Nocera, the podcast, The Shrink Next Door. It was actually developed in concert between Bloomberg and Wondery. They also have developed hit podcasts like Dr. Death and Dirty John. Well, Wondery apparently is talking to bankers about strategic options, as they say, including potential sale, hoping to cash in on growing interest from technology and media firms. The podcast business, it is red hot right now.
Well, and listen, they do it so well. You feel like you're reading this great novel. You're just kind of pulled in. I mean, I'm truth be told, I said this yesterday. I remember getting off the train. I wasn't done with listening to The Shrink Next Door. And I'd literally stand outside my front door just waiting for like the episode to end. And my family would be like, are you okay?
What are you doing?
Like,
Are you coming in? We've got your eggplant pizza here.
Exactly.
And a giant glass of wine.
Exactly. So they're aiming, listen to this, Jason. They're talking about $200 million if they pursue a sale, according to those in the know. Double its valuation when it announced a fundraising round back in June of 2019. They're also, their options include just raising some more money or doing a deal with a special purpose acquisition company known as a SPAC.
Blank check company.
Heard of them.
Exactly. Heard of them. Heard a lot about them of late. I mean, listen, it's interesting. And when I think back to last year's Bloomberg 50, the Gimlet Media founders, they were on that list. We interviewed them at the event, RIP events.
10 years ago. Oh,
yeah,
no, last year.
No, it was last December, as a matter of fact. Gimlet, of course, was sold to Spotify for $200 million. Spotify then essentially doubled down, as it were, on the podcast business. They bought The Ringer, Bill Simmons' well-known podcast and website brand. So they've been spending heavily. They did a big deal with Joe Rogan as well. So folks investing pretty heavily in podcasts.
And they're not just ad dependent. About a quarter of their sales come from other sources. So it's a little bit of a different model. It's interesting. But anyway, something we are watching. This is Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Off session highs, but still an up Friday with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. Stocks are climbing as dip buyers appear after that market slide this week, tempering concern over a cloudy outlook for a U.S. stimulus package. Wall Street is on track for a losing week, but right now the S&P is up 48, up 1.5%. The Dow is up 326, up 1.2%, while NASDAQ is rallying 232 points, up by 2.2%. 10-year right now up 3/32 with a yield of 0.65%. Gold lower, little change, down 0.2%, 18.64 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude is down 0.5%, $40.13 a barrel. Top U.S. aviation regulator plans to test fly Boeing's grounded 737 MAX on Wednesday in an attempt to show an antsy public the proposed fixes will be safe. This according to a person familiar with the plans. Boeing, member of the Dow, up by 5.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
on Bloomberg Radio.
Time for the drive to the close. We're getting to the close of trading here for the week, and as Charlie said, getting very close to the end of this quarter.
Isn't that
which
crazy?
Is
September.
Kind of bananas in a lot of ways.
Like, it was interesting to hear the hedge fund story where they were saying, hey, workers, don't come back till next July.
Yeah.
Like, that is...
Yeah, I know.
more than
I
a
know.
full year.
Time has started to become like sort of weirdly elastic, it feels like.
Yeah.
Let's check in with Sean Cruz, Manager of Trader Strategy at TD Ameritrade. He joins us on the phone from Chicago. Sean, how are you? How are things out in Chicago?
They're great so far. I had some pretty decent weather, which is always nice. You can at least maybe get out and walk around and occasionally sit out in a patio if you get the chance.
Right.
Is it safer in terms of virus and your concerns, or how are you guys feeling that still?
No, I think there's still a little bit of concern, and they actually have taken some steps to not necessarily put in restrictions, but they have gone to asking you whenever you are interacting with, a server to put your mask back on while you're conversing, putting your order, things like that. So I think they are sort of trying to go in the direction and get ahead of things a little bit because there is this expectation, I'm sure we'll get this in a second, of the potential for a sort of a second round or second wave of COVID coming here in the U.S., which you've already started to see overseas. And so I think it is prudent to get ahead of it a little bit if we can.
Your Bears are looking pretty good.
We're not used to it. I always say some teams like to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. The Bears have been known to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. So
Yes.
close wins, but we'll take them. 2-0 is 2-0.
Yeah, well, I
We'll
think you're
take
playing my Falcons this weekend, and we have had not a great start. So very vulnerable, to say the least. All right, so let's talk about what's going on in the markets, if we can. You know, one thing that we actually didn't talk about as much as we probably should have yesterday is Costco. And I do wonder what you make of it, because I think a lot of our listeners out there, big Costco fans, candidly. I certainly put myself in that category. But what was your read on what they said? Because it is sort of an interesting economic indicator, it feels like.
Yeah, and so Costco, it's always interesting to look into the details of what Costco does. So you never really get too surprised by their revenue numbers because they put those out monthly. So we sort of knew what the 3-month revenue picture was going to look like for them. But it's always interesting to look and see if foot traffic, cart size. You maybe saw people making less trips, so foot traffic was down, but you saw the average cart size go up. That's something that you would expect to see continue. Digital sales is actually fairly strong for Costco as well, but I think it reinforces when we try and paint this picture of what people are doing right now. People are maybe have kids at home because they're not going off to college, or even if they have some kids that were millennials living in cities who now can work remote, decided to save them money money on the rent and just move back home as well. So I think there's more people in some of these homes, so they are now going out and cooking at home a lot more as well. And that sort of favors companies like Costco, because if you have 4 or 5 mouths to feed, it becomes pretty price efficient to go buy it all in bulk at Costco.
Well, it's funny because we talked with the General Mills CEO this week, and he said specifically, it's not like you're not only feeding yourself breakfast, but now you're feeding yourself lunch, and listen, we work for a company that would often feed us all of that, but I mean, people are definitely cooking more and they need more food at home.
Yeah, and I mean, I could say I typically always, ate lunch out in the city somewhere. We, would order in for dinner, go out for dinner. So definitely, I think even if you aren't doing it for the entire family, pretty much everyone across the board is having, to some extent or another, prepare food at home. And so that favors quite a few different businesses. Amazon with grocery deliveries, another, I think, great example of something that's shifted over the past couple of months. And I think that actually changes behaviors moving forward. People were a little skittish about, am I comfortable ordering vegetables or something that can spoil quickly online? And now they've gotten comfortable with that. And I think the companies that are delivering that service have ironed out a lot of the wrinkles as well. So I think that is actually going to be an interesting shift moving forward, that we shouldn't expect that pendulum to swing back entirely the other way, even in a post-COVID environment.
Sean, when you think about the election, less than 40 days out here, we are talking about it all the time from a news perspective, and certainly the political headlines are running fast and furious. But I do wonder, both historically and everything is sort of thrown out the window, I feel like, historically these days, how do you think about the election as it bears down on us, given that it is so close?
So one thing that I think in the past in this election will be, maybe you can have one president is, maybe back in Florida when there was the whole the hanging Chad ordeal, and that took us some time to work through the court cases to really, officialize the outcome, at least for Florida. I think now the expectation is, it's one thing when it's just Florida, it's just one state. We may have this across multiple states, and it may take some time to get an idea of who the signed, sealed, delivered winner for the election is. So I think it's generally agreed upon across the board, across the political spectrum. We're not going to know who the winner is on election day, or probably even the days after. So it'll be a little bit different than, okay, who won? I know who won. Now here's how I'm going to maybe react to, what their policies are going to be. And there are two very different economic policies, especially from the tax point of view, being put on the table here. So there's going to be certainly some impacts on asset prices, I think, dramatically one way or another, based off who the eventual winner ends up being here. The thing is I think there's going to be a significant amount of volatility. If we look at the volatility futures, they're sort of pointing to that as well, for the volatility futures in that November time period. And I honestly think you're going to think of the headlines we get, around COVID that can sort vaccinations that can drive us one way or another day to day. I think it's going to be like that, but even more amplified in the weeks after the election, based off of how the various counts and rulings are going to be going. I think that's going to be the big headline risk going into November. And I think that's even why in days like today, where you have pretty broad-based strength, you're not seeing the VIX pull back too much. I would expect on a day with this much broad-based rally, I mean, it's pretty much across the board on the heat map green. The VIX is still up above 26. So it's telling you they're having a nice day, but you should expect choppiness and swings like this, I would say, at least for the next 2 months or so.
Well, listen, it's going to be crazy between the election and if we start to see virus cases pick up. There's going to be so many things being thrown once again at investors. Sean, thank you so much. Good chats. Sean Cruz, Manager of Trader Strategy at TD Ameritrade, on the phone from Chicago. And Jason, we're just about 3.5 minutes away from the final trading day of the week. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellett. There you have it. Sound of the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange on this Friday, September 25th, and it is on to the weekend. This Business Flash brought to you by Witham, a forward-thinking advisory and accounting firm helping clients to be in a position of strength in the new reality of business. Learn about their innovative solutions by visiting witham.com. Stocks climbed as dip buyers appeared to reemerge after the market slump this week, tempering concern over a cloudy outlook for a U.S. stimulus package. Now, on the week, fourth losing week in a row, down 0.6% this week. The S&P up today, though, advancing 51 points at the close, ending the week at 32.98, up 1.6%. Year to date, the S&P showing a gain of 2.1%. The Dow up 359 points today, up 1.3%. NASDAQ up 241, a gain of 2.3%. 10-year up 4/32 with a yield of 0.65%. Gold down 0.3% at $18.62 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.6%, $40.06 a barrel. So it was an update on Wall Street today. Sean Cruz is manager of trader strategy at TD Ameritrade. Moments ago, right here on Bloomberg Business Week, he told us expect uncertainty and volatility right around the election.
I think now the expectation is, it's one thing when it's just Florida, it's just one state. We may have this across multiple states, and it may take some time to get an idea of who the signed, sealed, delivered winner for the election is. So I think it's generally agreed upon across the board, across the political spectrum. We're not going to know who the winner is on election day, or probably even the days after.
Cruise stocks among the standouts today after an upgrade at Barclays. Shares of Carnival Corp up by 9.7%, Royal Caribbean up 7.7%, and Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings up today by 13.6%. Recapping S&P up 1.6%, I'm Charlie Pellett. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Move around. Motion creates emotion.
I feel the earth move under my feet.
You move like they do. I've never seen anyone move that fast.
Shake. Shake. All right, people, let's move like we got a purpose.
Company's called Movers and Shakers. They cost a little more, but that name cracked me up.
Bloomberg Business Week. Movers and Shakers with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Yes, indeed. Time to take a look, a little bit of a deeper dive on this Friday into the trade. Charlie, of course, giving you those closing numbers for the week. Down 1.75% on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. S&P down about 0.6%. NASDAQ, though, in the other direction. We bounced around really throughout the week. Some buying and some selling, but certainly some buying into today's trade. NASDAQ was up 1.1%. Year-to-date, Jason Kelly, we're down 5% on the Dow. We're up more than 2% on the S&P, and we're up now 22%. On the NASDAQ. We had all of the major industry groups in the S&P 500. Mind you, energy was pretty much flat on the day, and consumer staples just up a hair, about up 0.5%. Best performing, again, those FANG stocks. Information technology up 2.5%. Real estate was up 2%. Consumer discretionary up 1.7%. Healthcare also up 1.7%.
Yeah, interesting to look at it, and I think it's important, and I'm glad Charlie did it from the beginning of the show, and then you did it just now, to put the week in context, because I think it's easy to get distracted by the day, be like, hey, things are looking pretty good, but it was kind of a tough week for
It was a tough week.
stocks.
I mean,
Right?
you really need to look at you need to look at the back and forth that we saw. I mean, we had, let me just go to the Dow. I mean, we saw some selling, certainly, on the major equity averages. If I think, like on Wednesday, we were down about 2%.
Yeah.
But we saw some pretty dramatic swings as well in a given day.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
think,
especially yesterday was kind of bananas.
Yeah, exactly. And we finished little change, but nonetheless, there was like about a 550-point swing on the Dow alone. I mean, listen, you and I talk about it, these big macro things. It's, we need some, most people would argue, Jay Powell, even the Treasury Secretary, reminding everybody and reminding Congress, that we need some stimulus. We need more stimulus to help out the economy. You've got that going on. You've got the election. I mean, there's just, we're still waiting, for a vaccine, of course, for the virus. So there's just these really huge, macro issues that are going to cause these market swings.
And, not to go full Tom Keene here, but, you can't sleep on the VIX, really. And I was glad Sean Cruz from TD Ameritrade brought it up, this idea, and had tip to Gina Martin Adams because she mentioned it, I believe, on Monday when she was talking about VIX futures. I mean, if I'm talking about VIX futures, like it's got to be a thing. Like if it's penetrated this skull, like it must be something that we should be worried about. And worried about maybe less so than just keeping an eye on, because if the market is essentially anticipating volatility, that's notable, and it's all about the election. It really is, and basically Sean's saying, look, the same way we look at vaccine headlines, we're going to be looking at headlines around like, oh, this lawsuit filed, or this state certifying the election results. I mean, it's going to happen.
Right. Even though we say it's going to happen, I think when we're in it, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah.
It's going
to be very
the world does not like uncertainty, and investors certainly don't like uncertainty. S&P 500, though, can I just say 437 names in the index higher, 65 lower, 3 unchanged. So investors pretty certain today.
You know who is driving that trade? The cruise lines. Go figure. I mean, they've gotten punished this year, but some upgrades. Specifically at Carnival, I believe it was Barclays raising it to overweight from equal weight Carnival. So still down 70% for the year, but notable. Can we talk Peloton?
And can I just say the cruise ship, listen, Carnival has been shedding assets. They've raised money. I mean, these are companies that have quickly kind of gotten themselves into ship shape.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
All right, Dave, you're up.
Hi, my name is Dave.
Wilson, where are you? Wilson!
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
We're going for a price on Wilson.
Open up the door, it's Dave! Who? Dave!
Hey, Mr. Wilson! We are going to bring in Dave Wilson, but we did want to talk Peloton because Peloton, we just got it. Dave, we're going to bring you in, but man, it was up today, Jason.
Yeah, it was up, and it's been interesting to watch that stock over the course of the week because, there was that report that Amazon had a bike with Echelon, and then Amazon came out and said, no, we don't actually have that. And so Peloton getting closer and closer to $100 a share, up $9 today to $97.73.
And gained everything. I think it was down 7%, on concerns about that Amazon bike. And
leaving
now
that behind.
Investors are like, and I was reading some research, and they're saying, okay, go ahead and have that confusion. Amazon, are you doing a bike or you're not?
Yeah.
Listen, Peloton, it's a sure thing.
We're going to do a ride with Hannah Corbin in the meantime. Whatever. All right, Dave Wilson, talk to us about your stock of the day.
Churchill Downs. It's named for the famous horse racing track, the home of the Kentucky Derby. The company operates its namesake track along with 15 other tracks and casinos and a couple of online betting sites. Churchill Downs, the company, was founded in 1937. The ticker is CHDN. The company shares have risen every year since 2010. They're up again this year after losing as much as 61% through mid-March. In the last couple of days, Churchill Downs has also been whipsawed. The shares fell yesterday by 9.8% after the Kentucky Supreme Court said historic horse racing terminals were unconstitutional. These terminals resemble slot machines, except that players earn payouts based on their guesses of old race results. Now, the ruling involved terminals from closely held Exacta systems. Afterward, Churchill Downs said in a statement that it doesn't use Exacta's machines in Kentucky. Today, the shares were raised the equivalent of buy from neutral Susquehanna, which said it doesn't expect the ruling to affect the company's business. Now, Churchill Downs made back yesterday's loss and then some. The shares rose almost 14.5%. Wow. That was the stock's biggest gain in 6 months.
That's a nice little kick up.
Yes, it is.
Ding,
if you were betting on Churchill Downs today, you came out a winner.
Hey, there you go. In the winner's circle.
Have a great week.
Yeah, Dave.
Stay safe.
Enjoy.
Yeah,
I will do my best.
And thank you for that Spotify playlist.
If you want to get
absolutely. And by the way, I should point out that during the week I will reach my 30th anniversary at Bloomberg LP.
That is so cool.
Wow.
Congratulations, Dave.
Congratulations. That is
cool.
Rare air, my friend. There are not a lot of 30s around. Nope. I mean, because Bloomberg News has barely been around for 30 years. Early days. Early days, Dave Wilson.
30 years.
Right.
There you go.
Good
All
stuff.
right. Congratulations on that. We'll see you when you're back. All right. In the meantime, let's get to Denise Pellegrini. She's got world and national headlines. Hey, Denise.
Hey, thanks, Jason and Carol. Well, President Trump's top economic advisor, this is Larry Kudlow, telling reporters outside the White House today there's new hope for more pandemic stimulus spending.
The conversations are going on. If the Democrats come back with a plan that's more palatable to our thinking, that would be fine. We'll let the president decide on that.
Yeah, we'll see what happens, though. Of course, Republicans have been saying they prefer a smaller package.
Ready, step. Ready, step.
Republicans and Democrats, meantime, uniting to honor the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg today. Women in Congress, Democrats and Republicans together, lining the steps of the Capitol as Ginsburg's casket was carried away. President Trump says he'll name his pick to replace her tomorrow, and Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Kamala Harris saying there are plenty of people for the president to choose from.
There are a lot of black women who have earned the right to be on a list, to be the next Supreme Court justice and to fill the shoes of the legacy of Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and so many others.
All right. And talk about long-distance voting. NASA astronaut Kate Rubin says she plans to cast her vote from space. Now, most U.S. astronauts, they live in Houston, right? And Texas law allows them to vote from space using a secure electronic ballot. Mission Control forwards that ballot to the space station and then relays it back to the county clerk. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Denise, thank you so much. All right, so can you do me a favor this weekend?
I'm going to wear a mask.
No, I don't have to ask you that. Can you finish watching Away so we can talk about it?
Oh, okay. Yes.
We don't have to talk about it on
Did
air
you finish
I don't
last
want to. We did, and I have to say I haven't been as excited to sort of like finish watching a show in a long time. I was saying to my wife, like starting early yesterday, I was like, it's finale night, and it does not disappoint.
Oh, good. Like,
great.
don't you miss that? I kind of miss that too. I've had nothing to kind of hang my hat on.
Yeah. So, and now, of course, now we're like, all right, what are we going to watch next? So, yeah, it's great. It's great.
Okay.
So,
Good.
but you need to watch it so we can talk about it.
Okay, we will do that. In the meantime, you want to talk about New Jersey?
So, I mean, this is so interesting given what we talked about earlier in the show with Florida being like, let's go for it, folks. New Jersey basically saying, we've got some hot spots. And part of it is that people are basically saying contract tracers are getting in touch with them, and people have been like, stick it. Not going to talk to you.
I know. This is tricky. And yeah, exactly. And I guess there's a lot of stuff happening in southern Jersey, Monmouth County, a lot of house parties going on, some related to college students and so on and so forth. But listen, Jason, this is this is such an important part of it. You know, we talk about testing, we talk about wearing masks, we talk about social distancing, but once we know that there's an outbreak, the tracing that goes on to say, you were probably exposed, we need you to quarantine, go into lockdown.
Right.
And people don't really want to participate.
Yeah. And it really only as good as the people who participate, and you need a lot of people to participate. It's sort of like a vaccine. Like, it only works if the majority of people, and in both of these cases, sort of the vast majority of people, are on board with it. You know, I mean, I listen to Morgan Freeman every day on this program.
I don't want
talk
anything to
about,
happen
like,
to him.
this isn't about you. This is about me.
Yeah.
You know, like, you have to think of other people when you're making these decisions. So
it's those young
Contract
kids
tracing.
in a lot of ways too, and those young brains, and you know, we've done that story too. They don't get it. This is Bloomberg.
headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pelleton. Up Friday, fourth losing week in a row for the U.S. stock market. This week, the S&P fell 0.6%. Today, stocks advanced. Dip buyers appeared after the market slide, tempering a cloudy outlook for a stimulus package. S&P up 51, up 1.6%. Stocks gaining throughout the session. The Dow ahead of the weekend, up 358, up 1.3%. NASDAQ higher by 241 points, up 2.3%. S&P, by the way, ending the week at 32.98. 10-year yield 0.65%. Gold down 0.3%, 18.62 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%, $40.11 a barrel. Recapping, equities advance. S&P up 51, up 1.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, given everything that is going on in the world of politics...
Oh, no, there's nothing going on, Jason Kelly.
And more to come this weekend and next week.
Yeah.
We got to check in with Josh Wingrove, White House correspondent for Bloomberg. He joins us on the phone. So, Josh, this is where we look to you because we could go 19 different places. What's the most important thing we need to know about the political and government world right now?
Well, we're coming up on that Supreme Court tomorrow night. Obviously, the president at 5 o'clock is going to name his nominee. All signs point to it being Amy Coney Barrett. And I think it's a little unclear yet how the Republicans seem to think it'll sort of
Josh,
choose their base.
Josh, hang on a second. We've got some problems with your line, and so it's not real clean for our listeners. So we're going to redial into you and get back to you in just a second. We're going to get back to Josh Wingrove, who covers the White House for us, because there is so much going on, Jason.
You know, one thing that I have to say I kind of took my eye off of until I heard a promo during the show. First debate is next Tuesday.
I was blown away.
Right.
Just because there's been so much going on, certainly in the business world and the economic world, but that's right.
And the political world, let's be honest.
Well, and it's just kind of crazy because it's like, oh yeah, the election. Like, we know the election, we keep doing the countdown, right? But it's like, oh yeah, we have to have the normal part of an election process, which is debates.
The debates, yeah.
Which I think are going to be, I think it's important this year. I think there's some really big issues, whether it's economy, whether it's virus. We got to know what these candidates are standing for.
Yeah, and I think people want some plans. There's a lot of rhetoric, as there always is, between the candidates. So we need to check in on that. All right, Josh Wingrove back with us, White House correspondent. So tomorrow we're hearing Amy Coney Barrett, Josh, is the front runner here.
Yeah, all signs point to her. I mean, the only other serious candidate that people have identified is Barbara Lagoa, and so far as we know, didn't even meet with Lagoa. So, he hasn't formally announced it, but that's where things are going. The question is what impact, and we saw the president this week go visit Ruth Bader Ginsburg and booze and hearing chants of vote him out. So Democrats, this will actually be more motivating for Democrats, not just for president, but in those Senate races, than it will be for Republicans. And so there's a lot of politics that are going to swirl around this one, but more or less expects that vote, that confirmation would happen before the election, potentially the week before. So I think, if you ask Democrats, Trump could almost be harming himself with this. Republicans, of course, think the opposite. But then, in the debate on Tuesday, it's surreal coming up here.
It's nuts. I mean, what are we expecting? Who's got the most at stake? I do wonder how we are going to see this. And they're both going to be on the stage? Like, what are the logistics to all of this?
Well, I mean, so obviously they have 3 debates. This is the one that they wanted to move up because, of course, people are voting and have been voting for some time. The Trump campaign had asked to move it up. The Biden folks said, no, Trump is chewing a bit. And, initially it was, he always says he's shot. He says Biden's not in his prime time anymore. But that has the effect, of course, of lowering Biden's expectations. Trump has kind of changed tack a little bit on that. Now we talk about Biden having a history as a good debater. So I think they're trying to maybe raise the bar a little bit for Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, interesting. And what do you think the key issue is going to be? And this will be moderated by Chris Wallace, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And Trump had a kind of with what was it, a few weeks ago, I mean, the core issue that a lot of people are looking at is just what Biden says. I mean, it's true when Trump's campaign talks about Biden not taking a lot of questions from reporters. That's true. Biden is not running a particularly high-profile, high-accessible campaign by any stretch. So I think Biden might have more chance to make comments than Trump, who you know, for better or for worse, is not shy about getting in front of camera. So I think that's a factor. But you know, the backstory dropped all this is the votes are pretty locked in. Like, we just have not seen a lot of movement in polls for weeks, if not months now. And so, you know, every debate that we go into, every article, be it like pick your country, everyone looks for that knockout blow. It could happen, of course. You know, you could have some big moment that changes the polls. Are in this election that most Americans have made up their mind. Not a lot of people sitting on the fence about Donald Trump after 3.5 years, you know?
Josh, really quickly, how close is it right now in terms of the polls?
It's closer than it has been, but Biden still has a sizable lead, bigger than people believe Clinton to have this time. So it's not a done deal, but Biden, there's a reason Biden isn't coming out in public all that often.
But a lot can happen between now and the election. We know that.
That's for sure. All right, Josh Wingrove, thank you so much. We know you're going to have a busy weekend checking out what happens with the Supreme Court nomination and all that follows after that. And then, of course, prepping for the first presidential debate. You can hear live coverage of that and analysis from our team right here on Bloomberg Radio next Tuesday night with David Weston and Kevin Cirilli, of course.
You know, I was talking with Peggy Collins, participating in this Bloomberg event I did earlier. I know. She says hello to our whole team. We just love Peggy. She runs
mostly me.
the U.S.
Can you say
economic
mostly me?
team.
Can you
Well,
just
it was
make
you
me feel
and
good?
Paul Brennan, our producer.
Oh,
so
good.
But she said, you know, what's tough is because of the, you know, working on the replacement for the Supreme Court for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that has certainly kind of shifted the focus of everybody in Congress in terms of a stimulus plan, which is very worrisome for her team who follows the U.S. economy. So, and you do wonder how that might impact the outcome of the election. See how I tied that up? Nice, tied it up with it.
Yeah, you tied it up with a
Occasionally
bow.
the synapses fire, you know?
It all fires.
Not
That
often,
perfect
but-
amount of sleep. That perfect amount of sleep. That's what we're always going for. That
Ollie
research,
free, too. Ollie free.
Ollie free sleep. Yeah, I went full Ollie last night, and I tell you, that melatonin gives you some funky dreams. Do you have
Totally.
that?
I
Yeah.
dream like crazy when I
Yeah,
take it. And
I had some
I
weird
often
ones
take
last
only
night.
one. I took two the night before. That's when I woke up and my husband's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "No." It's like
You're
I
like,
walked into a I was. That's exactly.
Yeah,
It was crazy.
exactly. Anyway, good night's sleep. It's important. Just ask Danny Blanchard. I love that there's economic research around this now. I feel like sleep has been one of the big discoveries here.
Mariana,
All right,
man,
we've
we
got
need to get her
3
back.
great conversations to round out the week and the show. So stick with us. We're going to talk real estate and more. This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
So I'm just going to say, if you Google monkeys and traffic accident, a lot of stuff comes up, which is really kind of shocking. Not Ed's story, but anyway, we do like talking about monkeys thanks to Ed Kalegi, because when does that happen?
He's going to regret that for so long.
Accident? Well, yeah, and how could you not keep talking about it?
I know.
Another thing we talk a lot about, real estate.
Can't wait to get into this. I
Me
mean,
too.
the future of New York City, landlords, tenants, it's a huge story. It really has a wide-ranging impact. So we're going to get into it in just a minute.
All right, first up, let's get back to Charlie Pellet. A check on your top business stories. Wouldn't you keep talking about monkeys in a car accident?
How can you possibly avoid it? That's why I love Ed Kalegi. Here's what's going on. We've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing today. Speaking of real estate, industrial, consumer discretionary shares rose at least 1.4%. Energy producers almost erased losses. Tech companies led gains in the S&P 500 as the NASDAQ 100 index jumped 2.3%. An up Friday, losing week, however, fourth declining week in a row. This week, the S&P was down 0.6%. Today, though, S&P up 51, up 1.6%. The Dow up 358, up 1.3%. NASDAQ up 241, up by 2.3%. 10-year up 4/30 seconds with a yield of 0.65%. Gold down 0.3 at $18.61 the ounce, and crude West Texas Intermediate down 0.5%, $40.12 a barrel. Priya Misra is head of rate strategy at TD Securities USA, and on Bloomberg Television this morning, she told us she has questions about the election and who might actually wind up in a potential Biden cabinet.
Even if we do know the result on election night, and let's say it is a blue wave, I think we'll be watching for who's the Biden, transition team, who's the Biden cabinet. And there's going to be big questions there as to how progressive, how important are those people in the transition team versus the more President Obama previous group of people.
And today we saw Boeing shares surging on a news report that the top American aviation regulator plans to test fly the grounded 737 MAX next Wednesday. Boeing led the Dow higher. Boeing shares up today by 6.8%. Signs of life in the oil patch after a period of stagnation. The oil and gas rig count up 6 this week to 261. This according to Baker Hughes. Among some of the energy names that we track, ExxonMobil up 0.9%. BP down 0.4%. EOG Resources up 2.2%. Pioneer Natural lower by 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, the world of real estate is fascinating to us, and we know, candidly, it's fascinating to a lot of our listeners and viewers out there because we all make use of it somehow or another in our work lives and certainly in our personal lives. We also know that it has a huge effect on the future of cities. So really excited to get into this with Pierre DeBoss. He is co-founder and managing partner of the law firm of Romer DeBoss, joining us on the phone from New York City. Pierre, really nice to have you with us.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
All right. So we've been following this very closely, especially when it comes to rent and, some concessions that were given early on in the pandemic. We know that that was seen as a good thing for renters and for retailers, but obviously landlords, they have to pay bills as well. Where does this stand now? Because it's a big fight.
Yeah, it's funny. We don't know the answer yet. That's what's crazy. That 6 months of the pandemic, we're still waiting and seeing how this is going to transpire. Because you're 100% right. How long can landlords be flexible and provide these concessions to keep tenants afloat? At some point, they have to worry about their own debt service and their own carrying costs. It's not, one of the biggest misconceptions I always say in the New York City real estate market is that everybody thinks that every landlord is a major institutional landlord with incredibly diverse cash flow and, tons of money in the bank. A lot of our clients, I'm a real estate lawyer, and we represent, several small businesses, family offices, and individual owner-operators of real estate. And the smaller landlords, which comprise of a larger portion of the landlords in the city than most people think, rely on that cash flow. And 6 months of not having that cash flow is definitely probably not on their business plan for 2020.
So how much time do they have, Pierre? So they've already had to deal with, what, 6 months and counting. So can they go another 6 months? Can they go another 2 months? What is it? Especially when guests come on and say, listen, we don't anticipate getting back to kind of a pre-COVID world until maybe a year from now.
Yeah, it all depends on how the banks are going to work with them. So, we represent a number of major lenders throughout the country, and what we're seeing now with the banks are doing for landlords who are struggling is offering forbearances. Between us, forbearance is really just kicking the can down the road, for lack of a better phrase. All it's saying is that we understand you can't pay your mortgage today. We're not going to provide you with any concessions, any credits. We're not going to restructure it. We'll agree not to foreclose on you for a 6-month period of time, and we'll revisit it in 6 months, and hopefully you can get current. The probability of all these landlords that are struggling financially of getting current is slim to none, because the cash flow is not coming back. We're not seeing occupancy of New York City increasing significantly. We're not seeing businesses. If anything, businesses are shuttering. So at the end of the day, 6 months from now is where you're going to see what distressed debt is there in the marketplace. Are banks restructuring? Is there government intervention? And those three factors are really going to determine how the real estate market, the health of the real estate market is moving forward, especially in New York City, when our problem here is compounded much more than other parts of the country.
True.
What's the we're going to talk a little bit more about this on the other side of news, but I do want to ask you, Pierre, what's the short-term effect on this? Are we starting to see this play out in certain neighborhoods or certain geographies, even within a locale like New York City?
It's funny. I went out last week in Hell's Kitchen, and you couldn't notice a thing. The streets were bustling. People were around everywhere. And, it really depends on the demographic. At most parts of the city, though, you really feel the exodus of New York City residents. There's a great stat about it for apartments. Last summer, we had 5,000 apartments for rent in Manhattan alone. This year, it tripled to 15,000.
Oh, my God.
So, yeah, people.
So that's not new supply. That's just people who've left?
That's correct. People have left.
Wow.
15,000 units on the market right now for rent. Because, when we're having this conversation about retail, restaurants, this impacts the social fabric of New York City. What do we love New York City for, right? We love Broadway. We love the food, the dining, tourism comes in here for all those reasons. When those aren't here, you're starting to see that result in people saying, okay, well, this is one of the most expensive cities in the world. Why stay?
Right.
And that's our biggest fear. Is a New York City resident, is someone who has a business in New York City. That's the fear. Is when will the population come back, and what will it look like?
We need to talk about that because I feel like there's been times before where we've said everybody's going to leave New York, and yet the city comes back even stronger than ever before. Pierre, hang on for a second. We're going to do a little bit of news, but then we'll come back and talk some more. Pierre DeBoss is with us. He is the co-founder and managing partner of the real estate firm that bears his name, and we'll get back to that conversation in just a minute. What?
I also want to talk about this sort of trickle-up effect that he has pointed out, because it's really important when it comes to big banks.
Yep.
All right, before we get to that, let's get to Denise Pellegrini. She's got some world and national headlines. Hey, Denise.
Hey, Jason and Carol. President Trump outlining his economic promise to Black communities today. This is at the Cobb Galleria Center in Atlanta.
Open 500,000 new Black-owned businesses. Increase access to capital in Black communities by $500 billion.
The president also predicting, guys, that he will win the election, the presidential election, with record support from the Black community. The late Breonna Taylor's family is demanding Kentucky authorities release all body cam footage, police files, and transcripts of grand jury hearings in her killing by police. Now, none of the officers involved were charged in her death, and protests do continue across the country. Jerry Cole is among those in Louisville, showing their support for Taylor.
I hope the people who killed Breonna Taylor, they go to jail.
Meantime, Democratic Vice Presidential candidate Kamala Harris at the NAACP National Convention on how she felt when she heard the police would not be charged.
It was a gut punch in many ways.
And Oregon Governor Kate Brown sending a message out ahead of opposing rallies announcing a unified command for major law enforcement agencies in the Portland area.
We are aware that white supremacist groups from out of town, including the Proud Boys, are planning a rally on Saturday in Portland. They are expecting
And Global News,
significant...
24 hours. Global News, 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take. I'm Denise Pellegrini.
All right, Denise, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly and Carol Master here. We're going to get back to our conversation with Pierre DeBoss in just a second.
Yes.
Talking about real estate. One of the things that is really integral, I was looking for the right word, to lifestyle in New York City, and it also plays into the real estate aspect, is restaurants.
Yeah, and listen, I love what Danielle Boulou is doing. We've talked with him. You guys have heard him on our show several times before, and he too has seen a lot of stresses over the last 6 months. Well, he's going to open up the doors to his Upper East Side dining room. That's going to happen at the end of this month, September 30th, but it's going to look very different than it did before COVID-19, and it's not just safety precautions, but what's interesting is he is actually reincarnating his restaurant. So he's got a new name. It's going to look different. It's going to feel like you're in the south of France. I love this idea that they're thinking, let's take people somewhere else because people cannot travel right now. But what's really going to be different is he's got sponsorships.
Exactly. Luxury brand sponsoring the temporary restaurant. Evian Water, Lavazza Premium Coffee, and Dow Vineyards all donated product and undisclosed amounts of money to help restart indoor dining at the flagship restaurant. This, of course, courtesy of the amazing Kate Crater, who, if you're not reading everything she writes about the restaurant scene in New York, you don't care about the restaurant scene in New York because she's got it all.
She knows these people, man, so well. She talks to them all the time. Prices are going to be about 20% lower than they were before the pandemic. A prefix menu served inside for around $125. Outside, a la carte menu will be served to customers. So it's interesting. They're doing it differently. And supposedly, Boulou says the brand's approached him with an offer to help. And this transformation was about a 5-figure cost.
Yeah,
there
figures. You go.
Yeah.
So they're being very transparent about it. They'll have sponsors on the menu with thanks, and so all above board. Can't wait. Got to catch up with Danielle. This is Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks rallied this Friday as dip buying intensified after a weekly rout. By the way, the U.S. stock market has been down for 4 weeks in a row, as measured by the S&P 500 index. On the week, the S&P dropped 0.6%. Today, up 1.6%, with the S&P climbing 51 points. The Dow up 358, up 1.3%. Nasdaq up 241, higher by 2.6%. After the close of regular trading, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's spokesman said that she talked with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin today regarding a relief package, and they did agree to continue their conversation. 10-year yield 0.65%, gold down 0.4%, 18.61 the ounce, and crude down 0.5%, 40.13 a barrel. Again, Nasdaq up 241 points today. That was a gain of 2.3%. S&P up 1.6%. The Dow up by 1.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it, Charlie. Thank you so much. Let's get back to our guest, co-founder, managing partner of the boutique real estate firm based in New York City. Pierre DeBoss is with us of Romer DeBoss, and he joins us on the phone in New York City. So we were talking about kind of what happens to a big city like New York right now, which has really been brought to its knees because of the virus, Pierre. I've seen it before. We saw it after 9/11. I do wonder if there's something different. I have a daughter who's 17, going to get ready to go off to college. She wants to work and live in New York City. So, you know, I do wonder whether it's just kind of where we are right now and people don't want to be there. I get that, but it's not like the demise of New York.
Yeah, I always like to say, you know, New York City is the most resilient city in the world. It will unequivocally bounce back. And New Yorkers are some of the toughest people you'll ever meet. But you're right. For the next couple of years, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be what we're used to. You know, we have a long road to recovery, getting the local economy back. You know, if you go to Midtown Manhattan, you have maybe, you know, anywhere from 10 to 20% of the workforce back in the office. You know, everything we're describing, you know, about commercial real estate, you know, all these stores and restaurants, coffee shops, and bars, they can't survive with only that volume of people around. So it really just boils down to when the companies can reopen, when the economy can reopen, and that's when you start the road to recovery. Because you also have to address what we were just talking about a couple minutes ago about how to lure people back here to wanting to live here. It's one thing to work here; it's another thing to live here.
And so, Pierre, talk about how interconnected we know this to be true. And, you know, we've mentioned a lot of the players involved in all this, how interconnected the system is, because a tenant missing a payment or delaying a payment, that sort of goes up the chain, as it were. And you've referred to this, I think, in comments before as sort of the trickle-up effect in a world where we so often talk about trickle-down.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about let's start from square one. You have the tenants, and unemployment hit historic high rates, obviously, and the government intervened, and there was a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures of single-family homes. Rightfully so. You know.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, time's up for today. What a week was today, yes? Let's sum up and see how good we did this week. Well done, by the way, well done to all of you who followed my trades and made the same profit, or maybe with less, but that's okay. As long as you did make profit, this is good. Okay, let's see. On Tuesday, we made 1,000 pounds. On Wednesday, it was 700 pounds. Yesterday, on Thursday, we made 500 pounds. And today, it was 1,315 pounds. Total weekly profit, 3,515 pounds. It was a good week, so well done to you all. For other guys who just follow our trades, keep thinking or kind of skeptical, will it work for me or it will not work for me, what's going to happen? Put this way, it's like taxi driver, for example. All you need to do, you need to learn how to drive. And then basically afterwards you will ask yourself, can I drive afterwards? Will I be a good driver? It's all up to you at the end of the day. The other guys who made the profit today, great, well done. Anyway, have a great weekend. Stay safe. And I'll speak to you all next week on Monday. Bye for now.